Today's topics on COVID-19 impact on real estate, particularly in the area of asset management. Today we have three panelists, Tien, Deputy CEO and Head of Investment from Capital DC REIT. We also have Chuan Ming Lee, Managing Director, Global Occupier Services, APAC Cushman and Redfield, and Lorraine Lyons, Head of Asset Management, ARA Private Funds, APAC Real Estate. We are pleased to have three of them, our prominent alumni, to come back and join us to share with us their experience in the area of asset management and occupiers' perspective. All right. I think the formats of this webinar will be as follows. First, I would like to invite three of them, each of them to share 10 minutes of their experience in different areas, because I think our three panelists, all three have actually experience in different areas, from DC center, occupier perspective services to asset management. Our first speaker, let me introduce her, Tien Lee. She's currently the Deputy CEO and Head of Investment, Capital DC REITs. She has more than 20 years experience in real estate investment, business development and asset management, and project management. Prior to joining the manager, she was a Vice President, Investment and Capital REITs Management Limited, the manager of Capital REITs. Since the years of listing of the REITs managing, she had been managing the regional investment and divestment. Before joining Capital Corp, she was with JTC Corporation and Center Lands, where she was responsible for business development, asset management, project management, and industry and business park facility and development for approximately 10 years. Since Tien graduated with a PhD Asset Management, second upper honors from NUS, and also have a Master of Science International Construction Management from NTU. Today, I think Cynthia is going to share with us experience dealing with this COVID impacts on a very interesting asset class called DC Center. As we know, most of the commercial estate may have been affected, but DC Center seem to have be a sector which stand out quite prominently during this period, because a lot of people are using data and online and doing online kind of trading and so on. So the DC Center seem to perform quite well. Maybe without further ado, let's invite Tien to share with us what is the experience in relating to this DC or data center asset classes. Cynthia?
Thank you, Prof. Singh. First, I'd like to say hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good to be back. And thanks for inviting me to share our experience. Thanks to the Department of Real Estate for organizing this. So maybe I'd like to share with you maybe some introduction on Capital DC REIT. We are the first pure play data center REIT in Asia to be listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange. And we were listed initially with the AUM of about 1 billion in December 2014 with 8 assets. And today our portfolio comprises 18 high quality data centers, and we're located in key data center hubs with an aggregate lettable area of 2 million square feet. The portfolio spans 11 cities in 8 countries across Asia, Pac, and Europe. And this is a significant growth of close to 3 times from when we started off 5 years ago. So data centers support mission critical operations, and the market has remained resilient in this pandemic with higher data traffic as we work and we all transact from home. So more people are also embracing technology, and these factors also continue to drive demand for data storage requirements globally. So there's also a recent report by IREUS which forecasted that data traffic has increased by up to 100% as a result of the COVID-19 lockdowns. And they have also revised the expectation on global mobile data traffic to increase from 27% from last year to the latest 31%. So 5G will also bring about faster connectivity, wider coverage, and reduced latency. And the real-time capability of 5G could also support advancements in the use of autonomous vehicles, cloud gaming, as well as the Internet of Things, which will in turn create more data that needs to be stored and processed in a data center. So these sectors' resilience and strong growth has actually attracted more competition from infrastructure and private equity funds, sovereign wealth funds, and REITs competing for assets and capital in the market. But what differentiates capital DC REIT from these new players is our ability to operate co-location data centers and while holding on to master lease assets, and this requires actually specialized technical knowledge and good relationship with our clients. So I think one of the key topic here, I think we are asked to speak on will be on how it's capital DC REIT managing the COVID-19 impact. As mentioned, data centers are critical infrastructures, and we will continue to operate without downtime during this pandemic. The fact that many of you are doing home-based learning and working from home using cloud or VPN, as well as even during our free time, whilst even not working or studying, we're streaming videos, we're doing everything like banking online and e-commerce online. It demonstrates the need and resilience of this sector. So data centers are now even more critical because of the increased demand and processing requirements. So for capital DC REIT, the safety and well-being of our clients and employees are also our top priority. So we have also implemented very stringent measures at our co-location facilities. We have standard measures such as the temperature screening, health and travel declaration, social distancing, like even people there having meals separately, and also split team arrangements. We also set up alternative network operating centers where it's practicable. So beyond these inconveniences, the data center market remains resilient, and data storage and processing requirements are expected to be growing in importance after the COVID-19 pandemic, as technology continues to be adopted in more ways than before.
Thanks, Andrea, for sharing very interesting asset classes. I think I just wonder, unlike commercial building, retail mall, there are a lot of people actually shopping and doing carry out different activity in shopping mall. But for data center, as we understand, the building is housing all those CPUs and server and so on. I guess this would be the least vulnerable, or least risky to this exposure to this pandemic, right? During this period, because you don't have many people in the building.
Yeah, there were a lot of measures that we have undertaken as well, because it is critical and mission critical, so there cannot be any downtime. So in case any of our staff get infected, we also split the staff into different teams so that they can all work. They don't have to work round the clock, but there's sufficient people in each team to keep the data center going.
This is a very important asset class. Maybe I'll come back to it again. Our second panelist is Chua Ming Lee. We know each other since Jun Slang time. We were the ex-colleague. She was my ex-colleague at Jun Slang. We were in different departments. Ming Lee currently is Managing Director, Global Occupier Services, APAC, Cushman & Wakefield. She has more than 30 years of leadership, business and industry experience in occupier services arena on a global scale. Throughout her career, she has worked as an occupier client and a consultant focused on occupier needs and worked in London, LA, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Singapore, taking different roles. Ming Lee is currently MD, Global Occupier Service APAC at Cushman & Wakefield. She has been recently appointed as Global Account Director for Huawei, another company dealing all these big data and 5G kind of technology. Her role including strengthening client relationship and driving business growth across different service offering by providing tailored forward-focused solution to outsourcing contract. Before joining CMW, she was the global head of transaction and data analytics in Unilever. Before that, she was also the head of the occupier services at Jun Slang. Really, over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Singh. If he goes on longer, I mean, I kind of reflected. Thank you, everybody, and good afternoon for joining. And I saw some of the attendees have got my classmates that are in, and also some of the new graduates who are in this forum. So when Dr. Singh reached out to me and asked me to be a panelist, and I said, asset management, what has occupiers got to do with asset management? So we kind of discussed around what do we talk about. So my entire career focused around kind of from brokerage to transactions, and then subsequently moving into seeing occupiers and see what are the demand side. So if you look at the real estate market, there's always the demand and the supply side of real estate. So if you look at that two groups, the occupiers that are in there, that's occupy and consuming real estate, are where I'm actually focused on for the last 20, 25 years. So what's the relationship with asset management? Landlords and investors who has properties, who pays the rent, who pays the demand for those spaces is really coming from occupiers. So if you have to look at the real estate market, you have to look from it from two different sides. The discussion kind of ran into 4 different topics. So we kind of look at it. The first one was pandemic. How has pandemic exposed weaknesses in real estate market? As you can see, it is really the way we work. I mean, Anthea mentioned about, kind of putting in safe distancing, putting it into how we actually decide the ways of working, because that will actually challenge the way we actually think about the demand of what an office should be, let alone, of course, data center will be a data center because that's kind of data driven or industrial. However, that actually determines the future of what office looks like, and as well as how the occupiers will use the space. And that indirectly will then flow into how do landlords or investors or owners of assets starts to think about the designing of what the space should look like, or the building that they offer in the market. So this is actually exposing the way we think about the traditional real estate market. After COVID-19, things are never the same. Will it go back to the same way as pre-COVID? In my opinion, it will not, because this is setting a new norm. Okay, so that's kind of first point. What's the potential threats and digital disruption? Well, there's plenty. One of the things that we've done in Cushman & Wakefield research globally, and also by talking to corporate clients or global clients like Huawei or IBM or HSBC, one of the things that is in their mind nowadays is technology is no longer an option. I mean, this is going to paint the fabric for future young leaders who are coming into the workforce. Because previously we might have thought, oh, technology, yeah, maybe we can survive with, kind of Excel, pen and paper, calculators, and we could do a business. Today, this is no longer an option of not embracing technology. In fact, it is an accelerator, and it's going to be part and parcel of the fabric of the industry. The second part of the threat and digital disruptions is digitization of how the corporates are looking at, or occupiers are looking at, data. There is always that hunger for more and more data and more information to analyze and to deduce what the future trends will look like. For example, because of the COVID-19 pandemic situation forces the industry to stop visits. I mean, if you're a broker, you end up not able to actually bring clients to sites. How disastrous that could be. You're trying to actually sell a space and you can't walk to the site and show them. Do you just leave it and not do anything? Right? It forces the industry to think of doing things differently. I think technology and talking about virtual viewing has been in the industry in Singapore particularly for many years. With the COVID, in fact, it is the accelerator and the catalyst to make that happen and becoming a reality. The second part about occupiers is now contactless is the buzzword. Right? What do you mean by contactless? Contactless means, can I go into an office and operate, I'll go into work and be able to reach out all the things that I have without touching anything? right? Can I walk in and splash my card? I don't have to contact. How do we actually press the lift? How do I actually get into the office? How do I actually book a meeting room? So these are starting to challenge the way we look at contactless office environment. The other very interesting trend that we have actually worked out was we went to do a survey in Cushman and Wakefield that we call experience per square foot at home. We sent out to globally across the world and asking employees, whether they are the millennials or the Gen Z or the baby boomers, about how they feel about working from home and what are their experiences. When it came back, a couple of things that actually the research material kind of came back quite surprised to me as well, right? Some are quite, kind of three big trends. One is there's a demand for more and more focus area. And two, there's actually a demand for more and more collaboration. The losing of personal connections among employees and the workforce is so eminent in the entire survey. And it's not related just to Singapore. As we become more global, that is actually a trend. The third one, which was kind of more shocking to me, was we talked about Gen Zs and millennials, young graduates like you all say, oh, I don't want to go back to the office. I want freedom. I want to work and I want to go out. What came back was the biggest challenge from working from home did not come from the baby boomers. It actually came from the Gen Z and millennials. Almost 70% of them found working at home was a challenge. Surprise, surprise, to me as well. Generation Z people or Z people call it because one of the feedback was they say, I don't have enough adequate workspace within the home. The millennials and the Gen Z and Gen X people, the group of the strata, says that I actually now have to take on more caregiver duties, be it whether looking after young children or be it looking after parents when they are all together. I have to actually spend more time. Put yourself, those who are working now, just put yourself in their shoes. I used to be able to be in the office and family matters is solved outside. But now, because I'm at home, I'm now being challenged to spend time with the family. So that's why, if you notice, it's not just Singapore, but actually across Asia Pacific, Americas, and Europe have the similarity of this. The number one challenge also is, of course, the connectivity across everyone. With that context, right, the new normal is something that we call total workplace ecosystem. You're no longer going to the office to work. We're now going to the office with a different definition. It's about how to collaborate, how to meet your fellow employees, how to have lunch together, discuss things along the corridor. And hence, the content or the components of offices dictates how we are going to design the future assets of the world, be it whether it's Singapore office or it's actually Tokyo, or be it whether it's in Los Angeles. It is the way the insight will predetermine what landlords or investors should be thinking about when they are bringing the assets to the market. And that attracts the right demand from the occupiers. Now, how does that make, kind of the last question that, Tien brought to us is, so not poor, but challenging times for new graduates. What new skill sets would you be looking at? And what digital content should there be in the real estate education, system? I think there are two main things that we need to start, bringing into the educational system. One is the ability to understand corporate real estate function more, right? Being we deal with a lot of the supply side, is really bringing in the education system of understanding occupiers. What does that mean if I break down a little bit more? Learning about data. I mean, Anthea talked about there's more and more demand to store data in data centers. But data is now so rampantly available in the industry or in the market, is the ability to take those data, analyze it, and be able to actually make sense of that. So from data analytics perspective and forecasting of what that means to the industry and setting trends. So being able to actually learn those elements in this will be most useful to bring into the curriculum. The other last part about data is visualization. Now, you may have to have the data, you know the trends. If you do not know how to deliver the message through visualization, you lose the plot. Therefore, learning that skills of how to visualize data, how do you interact data A to data point B to data C to show a trend or a message is actually utmost important. And I personally have gone through this recently with Huawei and trying to work on visualization of their data. I thought I knew, I actually don't know. So I'm actually also learning about how do we actually do better visualizations through automation and robotics.
Thank you, Mili, for sharing interesting perspective on the occupier perspective. We have heard a lot of discussion about telecommuting, working from home and so on. Will the play still relevant factors now with everybody working from home, whether you're working from home in London or Singapore or even in Shanghai? Does it matter how these occupiers, like for example Huawei, adjust their strategy in how occupiers study?
Generally, you have different occupiers are now starting to think about how do I actually offer a office at home. All right, so coming back to the office requires a redesigning of the internal, right? Social distancing, how do you walk through? We call a word called it's not a word, okay? It's called we talk a lot about densification. Many of us heard about it. You pack more and more people inside the office. Today is de-densification because of the social distancing. Hence, bringing in alternative workplace from working either from home or anywhere else is actually as critical as part and parcel of the fabric of offering to your employees. Commuting to home, the other piece that is influencing the demand side as well from the occupiers is about moving from urban to suburban. I think many times, it has always been a tussle. Do you put your office or your workplace in CBD or do you work in the suburban areas? It's now pushing the boundaries of moving into more suburban, primarily because of continuity of business. Can you imagine if everybody is packed into one building? And when that happens, you are down with no place to dock for your employees to work. And so going into the suburban areas with a center with spoke office strategy are some of the discussions among not just Huawei, but across all the other occupiers. And it's not just office alone, just not just the real estate element as well. We have to actually bring in the HR elements consideration. You have to bring in the health and safety elements as well as insurance. Can you imagine your employees working from home got injured? Is that covered? So all these are challenging the boundaries, not just in real estate market, but also the other associated markets or elements of their businesses.
Let's move on to the next speaker, Lawrence, because we heard about from the occupier, the tenant perspective. Now let's move to look at the landlord or asset manager perspective. The third panelist is actually Lawrence Lai. He's currently the head of asset management of ARA Private Fund, APAC Real Estate, responsible for all asset management activity in the division. Lawrence has 25 years of experience in asset management, leasing and marketing of real estate in Asia Pacific. Prior to joining ARA, she was the executive director of asset management at JP Morgan's Asset Management and Aviva Invest Asia, managing office, retail, industry leases in Australia, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, and Singapore. She was also, prior to that, she was manager with of asset management department at AIG Global Real Estate. She also had experience in JTC. We were both colleagues, also classmates. We graduated from the same years from asset management. Let's invite Lawrence to share with us from the asset manager perspective or fund manager perspective. How do they deal with this, pandemic during this period? How, especially managing all this social distancing, dedensification, and so on. Lawrence.
Thank you, Tien Phu.
Yeah.
I'm really very privileged to be here today. A lot of old faces. Tien Phu, of course, he was my schoolmate, colleague back at JTC. Ming Lee was my ex-boss. Anthea was actually one of the industry contacts. And I could see when I scrolled through a lot of my ex-colleagues. I've got Marcus, ex-JTC. I've got David Tam, ex-AIG. I'm just so blessed that there are a lot of people. I think well done, Tien Phu and the School of Real Estate. You guys have done a great job to publicize this event. All right, without further ado, I've got some slides to share. Ming Lee as well as Anthea has shared with us about the data center sector, as well as Ming Lee from the occupiers sector. On my end, I will be sharing with you about the, from the landlord's perspective, what we've encountered actually the last, call it 6 months or so, which has been really challenging. And as we speak, actually, a lot of things continue to unfold. Now you're talking about resurgence in a lot of other cities, whether call it China, US, even in Korea, and lately in Australia. Today's presentation, I've only got 8 slides to share. I'll do a bit of introduction of ARA. I think a lot of you do not know who is ARA. It's not related to AIA, AIG. It is a local homegrown company. Okay, ARA was founded in 2002 by our current group CEO, Mr. John Lim, together with Chung Kong Group. So that was in 2002. The company was listed in Singapore Stock Exchange in 2007, but shortly in 2019, it got delisted. Key reason is because at the rate, being a listed company, it does hold back the company to be able to expand. So upon being delisted in 2019, we had Robert Pincus, which is one of the largest private equity company based out from America, who came in, and they're currently actually one of our largest shareholder. In terms of AUM, we're currently sitting at US $60 billion. Footprint, 9 offices worldwide, operating in 28 countries. And something that I wanted to just highlight, which is a point about being a unique investor operator model. So as a fund management company, we actually have we call it vertically integrated investment model, whereby we have all the various scope ranging from research to investment to asset management to property management leasing. So today's session, I'll just focus on asset management, which is where I head up. Track record, we have actually 19 REITs at the moment and more than 100 private funds. Okay, this will be a snapshot of the various products that we have. On the left column would be your listed vehicles. I think most of you will be very familiar with Suntec REIT, Fortune REIT, ARA Logos, which was previously known as the, it was actually renamed only in April this year. Private funds, which is where I'm sitting, ARA Private Funds. And of course, on the right-hand side is actually the infrastructure business. Canadix is actually our associate. They are based out in Japan. In fact, one of the largest asset management company in Japan. Okay, just a little bit about the asset under management. And these are essentially direct assets managed by the group, excluding assets owned by the associates. Portfolio-wise, we currently have 90 assets spread across Asia Pac. And in terms of the footprint, it's more than 55 million square feet. And majority are actually offices, followed by retail. And we have got some other assets in logistics as well as hospitality. Okay, this is really a snapshot of some of the assets that I currently manage. under my portfolio, I've got about 15 asset 15, but for today's presentation, I'll just focus on a few of these. And in terms of presence, you'll be looking at the top column or top row. The four on the top row will be, we've got assets in Australia, ranging from Perth, Melbourne, Sydney, as well as Brisbane. And these are all pure office buildings with some complementary retail. Right at the bottom, we've got 2 office assets in Shanghai, one in Pudong, one in Puxi, as well as a regional mall in Dalian. So later, I'll just quote some examples. So I thought it's good to let everyone know what I'm referring to. And of course, Suntec's Singapore Convention, which went through a lot the last 3 months with all these closures going on. Okay, in fact, when I was drafting all these slides, I was taking stock. I graduated in 1994, same year as Tien. Job market then was pretty good, I must say. So we actually joined JTC, and from then to call it 2008, which was the last GFC. So we had Asian financial crisis in 1997. There was a dot-com bubble for some of you who experienced it in 2001. SARS came shortly after that in 2003. Followed by the global financial crisis in 2008. So that 14 years I remember of my career, I've gone through 4 crises, big and small. So I think some of you who are in the panel could understand what I'm referring to. So, but nothing beats this time round, to be very frank, if I look back and compare, because the magnitude of some of these crises were very much either industry-based. So for example, .com was just mainly IT. Of course, it's got some spillover effect, but nothing so massive like COVID. GFC was more financial related industry. Asian financial started in Thailand, and of course, it's got spillover effects to the rest of Asia. But this time around, COVID's impact was huge, or is huge. It's still very huge. Affected all our sectors, except maybe like what Andy has highlighted for the data center and maybe some parts of logistics, they are least affected. Our office buildings, our retail buildings, hospitality especially, which I'm not presenting hospitality in today's session, they are all very badly affected. Convention center being the other one, which I manage directly in Singapore. I will just take everyone through the impact. And today's presentation, if you look at the top, the headline there I put here, impact and asset management initiatives, control, defend, recover. So these were the 3, I would say, words that could describe what I had gone through and what is still, in an ongoing process. Control, in the sense that when COVID struck us, and it started from China, you can see the China flag here. What are the things and measures that we put in place? Lots of measures, and different country, and even within China, different parts of China have very different initiatives. Why do I use the word defend? As a landlord, the last you want to happen is that your asset value just, tumble overnight. So as a landlord, we need to look at how do we then defend our occupancy, how we defend our revenue, how do we defend our valuation. So that's something which we hope, as AMs, we hold very close to our heart. How do we defend the value of the asset? And most importantly, which is currently what we are going through with most of the assets, how do we get out of this recovery? Is it going to be a 6 months recovery, 12 months, 18 months? Nobody knows. And that's really the scary part, which as much as we are actively managing our asset, we are still chartering very, very new frontier, very new territories. So with that, I'll kickstart with China. So just to maybe have a bit of recollection. So Wuhan was locked down in January 2020, and that was actually just 2 days before the Lunar New Year. So in my mind, and I was still trying to recollect what happened, I was going through all my emails. So my colleagues were all still going for their holidays because Chinese New Year, and nobody really took too much or paid too much attention to the Wuhan lockdown. Yes, it got locked down, but is it just Wuhan and that's it? So that happened, and we actually got down to serious work only in early Feb when my colleagues were all back from holiday, and we had to quickly call for meetings, and that's when a lot of things happened. So the government started, the China government, they're really fast. So they started with all the initiative. So every day I get loads of WeChat. The government would just post, and then my colleague has to forward to me, say, Li Zhong, today got to do this, do that. Tomorrow is something else. and we have got assets in Shanghai. Shanghai directions are different from Dalian direction. So it's just a whole lot of things that happen within that short time span. But on the hindsight, I must say that the Chinese government were very decisive. They were very quick to act. And I know that one of the first things that they told us is everybody must put on masks. You know, shoppers, those who are going back to the office, everybody has to put on masks. You would have to actually disinfect all your contact points twice a day. So all our buildings step up all our cleaning. We have to switch off our aircon, which thankfully it was actually winter that time. We were like, how do you off the AC? And our malls were actually trading. Everything was still pretty much normal. You know, the malls were still open. They didn't shut down our malls, unlike Singapore. So our malls were all still operating, but they were very specific. They told us, look, cinema must close, gym must close, kids' education must close. So the government was very targeted in closing down areas which are very dense. So that was pretty much what happened the first couple of weeks when all the directives came in. And as you can see, retail footfall and sales plunged. So sales were like down 90 to 95%. Office building were only like within a short time, just about 10% physically occupied. I talk about all the measures put in place by the government. And with that, we had to then maintain very close communication with our tenants because everybody is now so afraid of having COVID cases in their building because it will affect either your shoppers' traffic or it will actually affect your leasability in terms of in future when you talk about leasing a building when people know, oh, this building has got maybe 10 cases of COVID. So effectively, everything stepped up, cleaning, screening, and everything. So that was really that intensive period. So the communication with key stakeholders, with the tenants, with the public, and with the lenders, those who give us money to buy our buildings and to service our loans, so they are very important people. So the communication part was absolutely important. And as much as we hope we know everything, we could only communicate based on what we know at that point in time. And fast forward, now we're already in July. In, call it end March or early April, China was pretty much back to normal. They actually lifted most of their restrictive measures. They were really fast. So you could imagine they locked down Wuhan and they didn't lock down most of the other cities though. So they were very decisive. Instructions are very clear. End March or early April, it was only, call it 2 months timeline. They managed to get the, I would say, the situation controlled. So they progressively actually allowed, I would say, staff, office workers to go back to the office. And on top of that, actually, the malls continued to operate. It didn't close. Cinema, actually, until now, is still closed, but they then gradually allow kids' education to open. In fact, only in end June that they allowed kids' education to resume. Karaoke was only quite recent as well. So that basically brought us to end March, early April. So we had footfall recovered to 50 to 60%, which looks worrying to us because we didn't close a mall and yet footfall is only 50 to 60%. And most importantly, sales was lagging behind. In fact, until now, sales have not gone back to pre-COVID. So this is really something that we are still working through and trying to find where are the leakages? Is it through online? Or have people actually curbed spending because times are bad, people lose their job? So we are still in that fact-finding mode and trying to, I would say, continue to fine-tune our strategy to actually ensure that sales will actually recover. So during this period, there were also opportunities to reposition our mall. And when we took stock, so Dalian, which is a mall I mentioned, our mall in actually Dalian, we actually, during that period from, call it end Feb to June, we had done quite a fair bit of repositioning amongst our retail tenants. We actually had 23 tenants who left us because business couldn't survive. It was pretty much a situation whereby when times are bad, tenants who couldn't perform just outshine. You know, you just can't hide. They couldn't pay us rent and we have to kick them out and we have to look at ways to bring in new tenants. So 23 tenants that had to leave the center, and in turn, we actually signed up 37 new leases. So we actually end up with a incremental occupancy by 5%, and that's in the Dalian Mall. It was a good opportunity essentially to reposition, something which now in hindsight we wouldn't have done. The mall is still operating for normal. Some tenants are not doing well, but still dragging their feet paying us rent. So that's probably something which we kind of benefited and actually emerged in a way stronger and better, for that particular mall. So I think apart from that, what else have we done actually to recover? I've actually talked about control. Okay, defending, we actually have repositioned some of the malls. How do we now get ourselves prepared to recover? A lot of advertising and promotion money have been spent, and we're still spending, to essentially get shoppers back to our mall. So we have launched a lot of live streaming. In China, live streaming is very, very common. Live streaming, tenants do it, we do it for them. Online, offline sales campaigns, so we continue to do it. So these are some of the things which we are still executing to actually lure shoppers back. And actually my last bullet point was just to share, in the midst of all these chaos, we actually had to complete the acquisition of a community mall in Shanghai. It was a very, very tough call. It was either do we forgo our deposit because you don't know how badly affected this mall is, or do we move on, but maybe negotiate for a certain price cut. And we did the later. We actually negotiated with the vendor on the pricing, get certain, I would say, price cut. And we use that actually to our advantage. We will use the money to do more promotion and also to reposition the mall. So thankfully, the mall actually did well. Currently, as at end of June, the footfall has actually gone back to pre-COVID. Sales is lagging, call it 10% behind. So we're still working very hard on that to get the mall back. With that, I'll move on to Singapore, our home ground. Okay, Singapore is actually, if I were to compare, process has definitely dragged up compared to China. So just to recap, we had first case in, call it NGen, DOSCON Orange in 7th Feb, circuit breaker in April, and now we're in phase 2. So that entire period, government has also announced a lot of budgets to assist retailers and landlords to tide through this difficult period. So there were 4 budgets being rolled out. And every time a budget gets rolled out, there's a lot of follow-up for the landlord to, number 1, pass down the rebate, and 2, for tenants who basically are not operating well, we have to then make the judgment call. Do we pass them the rebate? Now it's made mandatory. The earlier budget, when it was given by the government, it was actually they encouraged landlord to pass it down. They didn't make it mandatory. So we then have to decide, do we pass it down to tenants who are literally struggling? Does it really help them? Or do we use that to help tenants who really need help? So there was a lot of judgment call, and we had to go through tenant by tenant. And it doesn't help that during this period, we all had to work from home. That was a real struggle for everyone. Because number 1, if under normal circumstances, if you know a tenant is not doing well, you will be paying them a visit and talk to them face to face. But in times like this, you look at the numbers, everything is helicopter view, you look at numbers, but you can't see the people that you want to see face to face. Even the colleagues that we normally get together for meetings and all that, yes, you've got Zoom calls, but it is still very different from coming together, brainstorming and things like that. So we had a bit of, I would say, challenge, grappling with these 4 budgets, having to execute it. At the same time, everybody is working from home. But on the hindsight, I think we did well, as in we do what we can, and we did manage to help most of the tenants. So what are the impacts on retail, office, and convention center? I've highlighted here, or I mentioned here, there's a word, force majeure. It was like the buzzword at a point in time. And for those who are not aware what is force majeure, it basically means what are the unforeseeable circumstances that prevent someone from fulfilling a contract. So as you can imagine, tenants with such clauses in their contract then came to us asking to activate that clause so that 1, either they can be waived from paying rents, or 2, some of them actually wanted to get out of the contract. So we were very busy as well, going through, seeking legal advice, making sure that we basically are being fair to our tenants as well. So that was also the period where we went through a lot of contracts. And I remember very clearly, I have a big contract in my convention center, which is on a slightly longer lease. And until now, actually, the issue hasn't been resolved. We're still going through the contract to determine. And I think end of the day, it would come to a point, it is really on amicable ground that you want to settle with your tenant. Contractually, it can only provide that much. But I think on I would say, goodwill basis, being a landlord, responsible landlord, we will do what we can to help our tenant. So that's actually the buzzword at that point in time. And so what do we do at that point in time in terms of, apart from, of course, physical needs to step up cleaning, which Ming-Li mentioned, you know, as a landlord, you're going to step up your cleaning. You have to, you know, sanitize more regularly. As the AM, we had to conduct a lot of stress tests on our entire portfolio. So it was a very stressful period, stressing all the assets. And what we did essentially is to actually then look at, if we were to give rebates to our tenants, 50%, 60%, 100% for X number of months, how would your P&L look like? Are you still able to service your loan? Are you still able to pay out your expenses? If you can't, then what's next? So we did a lot of all these stress tests just to essentially find out if things get really bad, then what is our next step? So as an asset manager, that's really one of the key things that we have to continually review our cash flow, stress it. We also had to do internal evaluation. We typically use discounted cash flow method to then look at if the cash flow is like this, then what is the impact on value? So those are the few things that caught us really, really busy in terms of stressing and getting to know how our assets could withstand the COVID shock. Next, I would actually want to talk about how actually technology helped us. And I know today's topic, there's actually a topic about whether a technology can be, or digitalization is more a disruptor or is it an enabler. In my view, it's actually more an enabler. It has definitely caused disruption, but to a large extent, with the thank all these technology and digitalization for helping us tide through this period. So we actually make use of data analytics. We use Tableau, which is under Salesforce, and thankfully we have that tool to help us because we have to digest huge amount of data, your footfall, your sales figures, and all that. How it has come down, what do you need to do next. And that really helped us in analysis. So I totally agree with Ming-Li. I think in our in the real estate curriculum, it is important to have some data analytics related kind of a topic to help our graduates so-called get themselves equipped when they come out to work next time. We then have to also look at, you know, occupancy costs, which in retail terms is basically, you know, how much rent vis-a-vis how much you're trading. And when it gets to a certain percentage means that you have to really watch the tenant is not surviving. So we had to go through all these. Inspection was difficult, like what Ming-Li has highlighted. How do we then continue to lease our office building or even retail, vacant retail space? Of course, before circuit breaker was lifted, we can't. But now that we are in phase 2, we are beginning to have physical inspection. And for tenants who are afraid of coming out to view, we would then have to use Matterport, which is actually a very, very, I think Valerie, Valerie showed this in one of the earlier sessions, which is essentially like your Google map, and you could navigate into the building and into different parts of the building. So we are still using that for some of the building for inspection. And in the midst of all these, we actually, digitalization did help us accelerate some of our initiatives. So we have here on my right-hand side, I've got a snapshot of the Suntec live streaming festival, which was actually the first of its kind in Singapore. We're very proud to launch that 23rd to 26th of June. Live streaming is very common in China, like what I said. So we are basically tapping on what some of these experience that we have in China, and we actually push it through in Singapore. We have been talking about it and we never get to do it. And somehow in March, COVID just accelerated the whole thing. I think something which we may take maybe a year to do, we got it done like in 3 months. So quite amazing. And we are continuing to use this platform. So apart from viewing it, we basically have a app And for those who are not Suntec City Lawyer members, you can just download the app, you can view it, and we can actually click and purchase. So this is almost like a Lazada platform, but on our own Suntec City web. So very proud that we actually launched this in the midst of all these COVID. And so that was actually one of the few initiatives that we kickstart, and we will continue to make use of technology to help us drive online and offline sales. So with that, I will then move on to actually the next country, just mindful of time, to Australia, please. Okay, Australia is a bit behind the rest of the country. So I remember my colleagues traveling to Australia in middle of March, and he breezed through the security checks, didn't wear mask, no temperature check, and he came back. He goes, there's nothing. You can't feel anything in Australia. But the borders were finally closed on 20th March. And if you look at Australia, it is quite different in terms of how they're performing in terms of recovery from state to state. So Melbourne and Sydney, I think they don't have the lockdown order, which Melbourne recently went on to a lockdown, I would say, mode on 8th of July. It took everyone by surprise. We've got quite a few assets in Melbourne, not very good news for landlord, but it is what it is, and we have to continue to work on that. And I just want to highlight a very important code of conduct, which was actually announced by the Australia federal government. And this is essentially like the 4 budgets that I talk about in Singapore, which help us tide through. In Australia, they have a code of conduct to assist tenants with, they call it SMEs, which are like your small, medium-sized enterprises with annual turnover of less than Aussie dollar 15 mil. So they are then able to come to the landlord and ask for rent waiver as well as deferral of up to 24 months. So this is one country, if you were to ask me, around the region, it's got the most stringent guidelines for landlord to help tenants. And this is biting us. It is still biting us. Every month, we're still doing stress tests on all our Aussie assets because you never know. And because it's up to 24 months, there is a timeline for tenants to lock in their requirement by October this year. But with Melbourne being locked down, we foresee that the government may push back some of this timeline. So there's actually a lot that needs to be done in some of our assets in Australia because of all these very extensive measures taken by the government. And we would have to continue to watch our cash flow very closely. On the recovery front, Brisbane has actually recovered slightly better, if you ask me. So what we have done is that we have actually signed up a few new office leases in the midst. In fact, it was signed in June when inspections were allowed and people went down to view, and we're very thankful that we could sign up leases for some of our buildings. Apart from that, on the bottom row, I actually have put in some of the, I would say, building features. So we have buildings in Australia which are undergoing AEI, meaning asset enhancement initiatives. So with COVID, and Ming Lee touched about essentially contactless features, which is very true. So whether you call it on the left-hand corner, you've got face recognition. You also have devices to sanitize your touch points, whether your escalator or even your robots on the right-hand side to sanitize, your building and your common area. So these are definitely things that as we continue to carry out upgrading of our asset, we have to incorporate some of these features into our building. With that, I'll move on to my last slide. Just to summarize the key takeaways, this list will continue to add, I think this is a very good session for me to summarize what as AM I've done, but this is not exhaustive. There's still a lot of things that need to be done to stabilize and to recover out from this COVID. Okay, my AM 101, when in school we study about diversification of tenants, why we want WALE. WALE stands for weighted average lease expiry, meaning leases which are, what is the remaining expiry of your entire profile. Of course, the longer the better. And strong tenant covenants. I think when you study about it, you probably just take it like, okay, it's just another theory or advice. But come crisis, you would really appreciate that you have all these in place. Whether diversification of a tenants, when you have, imagine an office building with, call it 2 tenants or 3 tenants, and if they are in hospitality, if they're in shipping, they are in the industry which are badly affected, I think as a landlord, you will really worry. You will really worry. So diversification of tenants is absolutely important. WALE, which in Australia context, they actually have a much longer WALE. Their leases are like 5, 8, 10 years. Whereas in Singapore context, our leases are 2 to 3 years. China as well, 2 to 3 years. So you then have the risk of expiry coming up and having to cope with it. So WALE, in AM terms, we always would watch, and we would actually want to maintain a WALE that's, I would say, relatively long, but on a defensive purpose. Strong tenant covenant, meaning the tenants they've got strong credit standing in terms of financial standing. So that's when you could do your market intelligence check before you sign up with tenants. I think these days with technology, you can do a lot of searches. Another key takeaway is communication. I can't stress, any more of that, because as we continue to, go through the crisis and, a lot of things happen and we were all kept so busy. What was really critical is communication, because the last you want to do is tenants don't know what you're doing. Your lenders don't know what you're doing, even though you're so busy, you're firefighting. So that's something which, communication is something which, as a team, we will then have to ensure that certain colleagues of ours are focusing on that. So communication, key. I think that's really key on my list as well. And I think with the help of technology, we are able to do so. In China context, we had a lot of WeChat channels that we can actually continually update our members in the context of shopping center. For tenants, of course, we go by letter, but even tenants, they use WeChat. So it was very useful that we could use that to broadcast and show people that we step up our cleaning. We have taken a lot of preventive measures, and these are all the things that we've done on site. So that brings me to the next point. I personally feel that technology in today's context, we have to use it as an enabler rather than a disruptor. And that really depends on which side of the fence you're sitting. I suppose if you're a landlord who are just so used to the old way of doing things, you are not progressive, you think that you are always doing the right things, then I think technology is the disruptor to a certain extent, because you are not keeping up. But if you're able to use technology to your advantage, whether in the likes of your data analytics, in the likes of your communication with your tenants and all that, I find that there's a lot that we can tap on in terms of technology arising from COVID. And just a little bit in terms of retail, through this period, we could also, in a way, and this is really quite interesting. Supermarket, I think, is really no-brainer. Everybody know that it's actually, they actually survive pretty well. Technology, gadgets, gaming, they did very well in most of our malls. And liquor stood out. And that was really quite interesting finding, especially in Singapore. Liquors were doing well, flying off the shelf, partly because the clubs and all the pubs are all closed. So through that, we kind of, in a way, then tell ourselves, in working out our trade mix planning after COVID or post-COVID, do we need to then look at things a little bit differently? Do we then, because as a landlord, we always go for tenants who can pay us good rents. And having to balance rent, sustainability of the tenant plays a very important part in how you want to actually plan your trade mix. So with this, we really need to then look at down the road, how do we then maximize it such that if, touch wood, another crisis hit us, we want to build a mall, a shopping mall, which is actually more resilient. And because in today's context, a lot of our tenants are still fashion tenants. And sad to say, a lot of fashion tenants were being victimized during this period. You have Esprit closing down, you have Victoria's Secret closing down, it's just widespread. So that has a lot of impact in terms of how we plan our trade mix. And as we talk, new concepts are coming up. Now people are talking about cloud kitchen. What's cloud kitchen? Grab has a cloud kitchen now. And we are basically now reviewing what is a new concept that we need to keep ourselves abreast and making sure that our mall is with the relevant, of course, features as well as trade mix so that we can withstand the next, call it, crisis. So that's something which I don't have an answer. We're still working through that, whether in China or in Singapore. We have pockets of space coming up, and we're looking at how to then maximize what we've learned this period to look at trades which are probably more resilient. Office, you hear a lot about WFH, your work from home phenomenon, how that will impact the demand for office space. Likewise, nobody has an answer right now. There's so much literature, so much write-ups about this. You can be talking to 20 groups of people and they're telling you the same thing, oh, demand will come down and this and that. I personally feel that it takes a bit of time for things to settle down a bit. And also on the point that Ming Lee has highlighted, because of social distancing, we find that good old days, landlords tend to pack, or tenants tend to pack a lot of people within a certain footprint. And bench sitting was an in thing. I remember before COVID, bench sitting, I was from JP Morgan, it was like bench sitting. You're just sitting just next to each other, without much of boundary. And that's going to change. So we need more space because of social distancing. And that to me would probably offset the impact due to COVID, whereby people may not need 100% of the staff to be working in the office. So there's a bit of balancing there. Maybe 30% of people are working from home, 70% are working in the office. But because of social distancing, tenants may need a bit more space. So how this pan out, I don't know. I mean, it's still yet to be seen. And to answer that question, and internally within ARA team, we had this brainstorming session, and we finally decided to embark on a tenant survey, because we can be guessing what the tenants want, but nothing beats going to the tenant and finding out what they want. So we are embarking on a tenant survey, and we're at least tenants in Singapore, Australia, China. We can do a good sampling and find out what exactly do people want post-COVID in terms of office demand. So that will be something interesting that we are embarking on, and hopefully I've got some interesting findings I can share with the Tien. So that's on office. My other point is on SOPs. I think in good old times, nobody touched the SOPs, hiding somewhere in the cupboard. Manage assets. There's actually very detailed and clear SOPs in terms of crisis management, especially. What do you do? Do you panic? What do you need to do first? So there's a whole string of things which I think during crisis, you must be very clear what you need to do. So that's when SOPs are very important to guide the entire team, to make sure that everybody knows where they're heading, which is my next point, clear leadership to deal with uncertainties, because everybody is just dealing with so much information. Everybody is frantically, they're being pressurized by tenant, and you really need someone with a clear mind and clear leadership to basically lead everyone through. And I have the word grit because AM is almost like running a marathon. Unlike investment, you buy a building and you pass it on to the AM to manage. So as an AM, you really need to have the determination to tide through things over the long haul. So, and with that, I'll end my presentation with just a very, I would say, a very impactful quote. As I continue to think through what I've gone through, I find that this is really something that really strikes me. We have to continue to, apart from learning, we have to unlearn certain things that we previously thought is right. We have to unlearn it because times have changed. And when you unlearn, you have to relearn. And to me, that's very, very important, especially in times like this when we have so many new, I would say, initiatives and technology that can help us. And to deal with this very, I would say, dynamic environment, we really need to sometimes change a bit of our mindset. For me, I've worked for 26 years. Like what I said, this is the first time I've encountered such a crisis. And it really takes me to change some of my mindset as well in terms of how an asset should be managed. Yeah, so with that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lawrence. The three panelists I mentioned, these are the term came out times and again: technology, digitalization, this intensification. Very interesting because I think the departments hope to continue to engage our alumni, and also at this very important juncture, because we look at this COVID impact actually is an important kind of time for us to rethink about trainings, because a lot of these terms, like for example, technology, data center, I don't remember we learned when we were a student during the time, what is data center and how do you manage a data center and so on, and how this technology can change the attribute of property, because you look at asset, usually in the past, in urban economy, we learn about this agglomeration, location. Things have changed over the years, and especially with the technology and also this impact. It's really a important kind of wake-up call. So it's very important now at this point. We hope through this webinar and also the continued engagement with alumni and also industry, we hope to actually really look into our education and also our course and see how we can actually redesign and revamp the course to make our course more relevant and make it more useful and take this opportunity to really review these educational needs and also training needs for our graduates. I'll just sum up some of the question, and one of them was saying that with this COVID, with this pandemic, a lot of people start to work from home. Will this become a more permanent kind of work practices? And how relevant or how will this impact our office space? Will the office space become irrelevant? Do we still need such a big space? And maybe I can invite Ming Lee and then Lawrence comment on this point. How would this, do you see this to become a kind of permanent fixture or permanent kind of work practices moving forward?
Yeah, so I kind of saw similarly the questions is, what do you actually consider as an office?
Yeah.
I mentioned a word called total workplace ecosystem. Now, where we see the trends going forward are that there will be 3 things that will be in triangulation. First one is the office, the second one is home, and the third one is what I call third place. Right, so these are the 3 triangulation, because through our surveys globally, we found that 50% of the workforce that came back to us and say, it's not just single location anymore. It's a multiple location that you have to put into consideration. One of the questions that I kind of saw was, will office be the same? The office component that one has to look into is no longer the traditional of me coming to work as an employee of a workstation, JP Morgan on bench, or you can't come in. Redefine what is an office. Do I come back to do focus work, or do I come back to do collaboration work? Once you have these answers, that will help you to actually ascertain what a landlord should do, short-term and long-term. You see a lot of temporary, service offices, a lot of buzzword, right? I mean, if before the COVID, you see a lot of, service offices by big names, and look at where they are. They're kind of coming down, kind of almost become a fad, right? It's facing a lot of different difficulties. Primarily, lenders and tenants, like what Lorraine has mentioned, has to play again the other 3 triangles. They have to work in collaboration in order to come back to a solution that is workable for, be it whether it's China, that is replicable in Singapore or London or New York. It is all about this fight with COVID is not any single person's problem. It's everyone's problem, right? And hence, we have to actually come together, work hand in hand together to actually find a solution. I think there was a question that was asked, what's the short-term plan and what's the long-term plan? Now, short-term plan is, like what Lauren says, reposition and reevaluate what you have and what is this still relevant. Long-term plan, make sure your dollar that you're going to invest brings in the future. Now, there's another question that asks, what do you think mainly office looks like in the next 10 years? I can't tell even the next 3 months, because today we have to work in a VUCA world. Right? If you don't know what VUCA is, please Google it or find it in a platform or another place. VUCA world challenges us not to think 10 years. You think 10 months, 10 minutes is probably the in thing today, and for that matter. That's kind of my take in terms of what office will look like. And vis-a-vis, it is really a place to commute, to bring people together for a different purpose.
I would just want to add, good old days, tenants like large floor plates, office floor plates in Singapore. Look at all the financial center in Singapore, your Marina Bay and all that, large floor plates. And they essentially move several locations into one building. I'm not sure whether with COVID, people would want, or tenants would want to decentralize, because instead of putting all eggs in one basket, if let's say, you have an infected case and the staff are all mingling in the same building, are you exposing yourself to more risk if you're centralizing everybody together? So I believe there may be to some extent, some decentralization of office, whereby tenants would prefer to have maybe your central location and some, I would say, back of house, non-essential services to be in the suburban. So that's something which I know a lot of MNCs, and I think Ming Lee is an expert in this area. They're looking at expanding, consolidating, decentralizing. So I think to some extent there will be impact in terms of people looking for multiple locations rather than putting everybody together.
I think there's also a question on data center. I think this is a very specialized asset classes. I don't think we even heard about data center when we were a student. What is this data center? Unlike others kind of office space, you need to provide workstation and so on. This actually, data center probably is just a building housing all your servers, data storage and so on. Maybe Antias can share a little bit how do you adjust and learn about this managing data center in your experience, transitioning from the traditional industry space to data center. What is the there's one question, how different between managing data center and industrial space? And then for data center, aside from increasing data storage required, what is the bigger changes and that will affect the real estate for data center?
I think it's a very interesting question. I think it also applicable for some of the real estate grads also, will I be able to also join a data center industry, given that this is also a new and emerging asset class? Actually, for myself, I spent like my first 10 years in industrial assets, and then thereafter about close to 9 years in commercial properties before going into data centers. And I think there is actually, what's more important is a strong fundamental foundation in real estate. Once you have a strong foundation in real estate, when we do investments in data centers or when we do asset management, I think the strong fundamentals in real estate actually put us in a good position to manage even a new asset class. And I think it's also about agility. I think today, like you rightly pointed out, when we were in school, we never thought that what we will be doing, in 20, 30 years time. And we will never think that, I'll be doing something as specialized as data centers. And we wouldn't even know what will be data centers at a point in time. So I think, so I think that is the mindset that I think will be important. Managing a data center will be no different from any other asset class because of the real estate. Like, for example, if we are talking about buying, say, a data center, what are the important considerations? At the end of the day, it's still about the stability of the income. It's still about the location suitability as a data center. And I think that there are also things that we consider, for example, when we do asset management, how do we ensure that being mission critical, how do we continue in the face of pandemic, when there is lockdowns, when there is lockdown in some countries, how do we ensure things get going? I think, in our cases, because our data centers are everywhere, as far away as in Ireland, there were also times when it snowed so much that the entire data center is surrounded by snow and the cars can't even move in. So in order to to prevent from totally being shut off from the rest, of course we need to have the essential team going in at that point in time to make sure that they stay in, there's sufficient food, there's sufficient people just stay in the data center during that period. But of course for snow, it can go away after 1-2 days. It does go away. But I think for a pandemic like this, we need to make sure that all our supply chain are not disrupted in terms of the maintenance, relationship with our vendors, keeping a close communication with clients. I think these are also important. And of course, like as with any other asset class, knowing know your market, know your competition, know your customers. I think these are important factors to continue to make sure that we manage our assets well.
It's going to be quite challenging with this specialization or this specialized class and also different requirements. As you say, we need to make sure that there's continuity in terms of the service, the supply of data, this connectivity and so on. Okay, I think there's quite a number of questions asking, I think this question was trying to compare the experience between China, Singapore and other countries, how the different countries actually manage or deal with these pandemics impacts. I think Lawrence had mentioned quite a number of these cases about ARA, the portfolio in China and Singapore. Maybe Lawrence, you want to share with us how different are these two countries, in terms of how they actually deal with this post-COVID, or maybe how to manage this COVID kind of impact, especially commercial or retail. How the changes you see between the two different markets?
Yeah, I think I can only compare, because our assets are essentially shopping centers and offices in Singapore, Australia, and in China. I think one of the distinct points that stood out was that China was really fast in knowing what needs to be done to control the situation. And when we first heard about all these restrictions, we were shocked. As a landlord, you're at the receiving end, you have to comply because the government tells you to do X, Z. But really, on the hindsight, when we look back, we are really glad that they had the foresight to tell us to basically switch off all the aircon, impose all the temperature screening for everyone, and everybody has to wear masks. There's no bargain about that. So there were very, very strict compliance. And of course, when you get down to the property level detail, even how you clean, and they were very, very descriptive. So, and the authority were very clear. And throughout that whole process, something which we are still pursuing actually with the local government in terms of whether they pass down any rebates or incentive to the tenant. They do not, but once you are able to show that you have passed on rebate to the tenant, you then have to apply to the authority to tell them that, look, this period I've given XYZ rebates to the tenant, can I then claim it from you? So it's also on a case by case for us to then claim for rebates from the government. So, and now that you look at, and now I have to start thinking back what happened. So now that you then look at the pace of recovery, China has literally picked up so fast. Like what I mentioned in my presentation, end March, early April, the shops are, pretty much back to normal. I mean, not 100%, the traffic starts coming back, 50%, 60, 70. Now we are almost like 80, 90%. The suburban mall that we bought, the community mall, is now back to the pre-COVID footfall. So it's very strong in terms of how confident the consumers are as well in terms of the measures that the government has put in place. They are now confident that it is safe to go out and people are coming out. So they don't have circuit breaker, they don't have phase 1 and 2. The only exception was really cinema. Until now, they have not opened their cinema. So I was quite surprised that our cinemas were open since yesterday. Until now, China has stopped all the cinema operation. They're not allowed to open. The last bit was end June, they allowed all the kids' education, tuition centers and all that to open up. Karaoke as well, they allowed them to open up. May was when they allowed gym to start operation. So it was, they don't call it circuit breaker, but they essentially control very tightly those trade that they feel are more, allows more, I would say, which are more contagious and exposed to COVID. So they then held back all those trade, and they gradually open up in stages to allow some of this trade to resume. Officers, in fact, our colleagues are all back to work since end of March. Yeah, but they were all wearing masks actually in the office, for a good month or so.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, there's another question about the co-working business model. Maybe do you want to answer this? How will decentralization, because I think a lot of MNC are decentralized, or what they call distributed office, having diversified the office instead of having all of them in one location. How will this affect the co-working business model? And I think co-working increasingly take out a lot of office space, especially in the CBD. A lot of the co-working space located in our central business district. And with this decentralization strategy of occupier, how would this affect their business model?
First and foremost, every occupier has to understand how their business is going to operate. First and foremost is really your business model. Your business model dictates how you're going to use your office composition. For example, it is where if your change of your processing of invoicing is going to be consolidated and automated. Many of these mundane work is repetitive. Work is going to be automated. It changes the way how you're going to deliver that part of that function. Compared to sales, compared to internal legal functions or the operational functions, with all these amalgamated together, then you actually determine what my company will require. And then you go out and see what is there the availability for us to fit these operations into. Looking at it, when one occupier decides how to actually place their offices or where they want to operate, it's no longer just a city consideration, urban versus suburban. It's actually a competition between cities in the country, between countries. Right? Where do I get the best low-cost model to operate? Coming back to the final thing about you ask, is temporary offices or service offices here to stay? The answer is yes. As you could see, the gestation period and the way we actually change our operations is so quick today compared to 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The business models keep breaking down and regroup. Right? And as Lorraine said, you learn, you break down, you relearn. Hence, there will be demand for such project-based type of offices. Now, as to which business model, which company provide that solution, it can come from the landlord, which is part and parcel of the offering of an asset. It can come from a service provider that focuses on providing temporary offices, or a new technology firm that comes up with something that is totally not considered here. So it's not a direct answer and says is service offices like a SurfCorp or a Regis or a WeWork here to stay. The answer is really about what are the offerings that's available for the occupiers to take in the market.
Maybe each of the panelists, you want to wrap up your discussion by giving your comments on this issue, on this question. What do you think if a vaccine is found, and then do you think the real estate market will go back to normal?
If after the pandemic, if after a vaccine is found, or even if we found a total cure, I think the way we embrace technology, the way that we are used to ordering things online, doing banking online, and stream videos, I think, and also cloud storage, I think that is something that will never be reversed. So I think whilst people will go out and spend more time socializing, or maybe going to office to work, but I think that the reliance on technology and even adopting even more technology in the ways, the different ways that we work and live is here to stay.
We actually, which is also the reason why in Singapore, I mean, China has gone into live streaming and online sales and all that. We've actually caught on live streaming in Singapore only recently in June. This is actually one piece which in our mind, we know that people are definitely continuing. It's typically a habit that was built up the last, call it 6 months, where people buy online, and we don't see that that habit would just go away once a vaccine is found. So the spending habits would have evolved during this period, whether ordering food or ordering anything like household furniture, everything you can pretty much order online. So that would essentially affect how much we can trade in the physical mall. So, which is also the reason why I mentioned that we accelerated the online offline platform, because we feel that that's the model to go in future. You cannot just have a mall that you open up and you expect people to just come in to buy your things. You really have to entice shoppers with all your online initiatives and to integrate it with your basically offline at your mall level kind of activity. So something which I feel personally will be here to stay even after a vaccine is found. Office side, I really give it a question mark, what will be the impact? But I do feel that it will no longer be the same pre-COVID in terms of how much people are probably more conscious of the amount of space, or employers are more conscious about the amount of space that they need to provide for each staff, for their safety, for their health, and so that would be something which would change the way in terms of how office would be demanded, as well as in terms of, like what I mentioned earlier, whether people would consolidate all requirements in one location, or will people then actively try to diversify so that they don't end up with all staff being located in one location.
The answer first thing is with a question. What do you consider as norm? Was using your phone norm 10 years ago? Today is a norm. So whatever we set today is tomorrow's norm, right? So that is where we start with the base. It will, with COVID-19's discovery of a vaccine, with that, the talk about it is 2021, who knows, maybe end of the year, depending on what comes out. Whatever that is, I agree with Anthea and Lorraine, is the norm is what we see today. It helps us, it has already changed the way we do things, the life. Human beings are like that. We don't like change. We don't like change. We like to have like this and we like to. However, being in the profession that we are in, we are requiring ourselves to be ready to embrace change and be change managers, right? To help and bring the industry or bringing the employees that you're working for or the company you're working for towards the norm as what we define. And importantly, I leave kind of the summary is the well-being of, be it whether it's a retail customer or an employee, the well-being of the human being is coming up in the front versus the hard mortar and bricks. So once you angle all your kind of consideration to include the well-being of an individual, the solution that you're getting out for your company or for whatever is your own silver bullet.
Thank you, all the three panelists. It's a very interesting sharing and discussion. Certainly enjoy and learn a lot from three of you all for sharing this. As I mentioned, this is not the one-off kind of webinar. We hope to continue to engage industry and also alumni. And through this engagement and sharing session, we'll be able to actually emerge stronger, and we are also in the process of reviewing and improving our course and curriculum. Hopefully, we're able to prepare our future graduates who are more prepared and more ready for the what we call the norm. So again, I'd like to thank three of you all, mainly Lawrence and Anthea, for coming and sharing and taking your time off to share with us your experience, and thank you very much.